So, welcome everybody. We have so yesterday we heard about the small-scale migration away from Windows, and today we are going to have something a bit larger, I think. So we have our speaker, Patrick Fitgerald, who I will now pass on the microphone, and he will hopefully entertain us for the next half an hour or a little bit more.
This is the height of the entertainment right now. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. My name is Patrick Fitgerald. I'm squishing two talks into one. They ended up like this. That's better, okay. It's just squishing two talks into one. They were typically, I think, about 45 slides each, and now I've sort of cut them down to about 90 total, or something. So this is really about, there are two parts. The first part is about the politics. How do you get someone high up in IT leadership to admit that they need something like Linux to run on whatever system? And then actually, how do you actually get it done? So everyone says it's going to be the year of the Linux desktop, but it won't be. It's going to be just another year of the increased adoption of the Linux desktop, just like every other year. It's a slow-growing phenomenon. And of course, I've given many talks about this. And yes, yet again, talking about the Linux desktop, but that's just a fraction of the e-waste that is coming from one bank in London. That's an entire floor of old equipment that they just basically dump stuff into the floor and they deal with it somehow later. You know, we already, I guess the thing is, all of us here already know what the technical solutions are. It's Linux. But getting to the point where people are installing it is obscured by politics, societal, community. Getting from that to something where we can reuse all that equipment is the goal. So who am I? Yep, I've got an embarrassing amount of experience in tech, and I've got experience in programming, x86 assembler, Forth, Object Pascal, Python, etc. And I've done lots of consulting for financial institutions, large and small. My company, iLayer, based in the UK, we've done some interesting work in the past. We set up our own cloud system in 2008, 2009, got a case study from IBM doing that. There's fully open source, no VMware or otherwise proprietary solutions involved. As a result of that, we got interest from Canonical to help them move or migrate 7,500 desktops for Allied Irish Bank, and we got a case study published for that as well. They were very happy with us. So yeah, and actually, yeah, as a result of that previous work, I thought there's something in that. There's a way to do a migration. They had some scripts. I decided to turn it into some Python code and then into a Django site, and it was for the end of 7, so all those years ago. COVID, unfortunately, so I was getting funding for that, looking for venture capital, but unfortunately COVID changed everything, dried up any investor interest, which was lukewarm anyway at the time because of a lot of reasons that we'll go through later. Now I keep on saying soon to be open source, but now that there is more and more a growing amount of interest in how to moving from Windows 10 to Linux, I will open source a lot of this code. So enough about me. Hands up anyone who's heard of something called Linux? Okay, thank you. You're now the expert, because I've met someone at a bar who's bemoaning the fact that he has to invest in Windows 10 hardware, and it's thousands and thousands of machines. And it's like, oh yeah, so I just met a Linux expert, you're it, go and talk to him about how you'd migrate. So you need to meet this guy, Horace, and he's the guy you have to convince.
Let me switch mics real quick.
Sure. He's the guy you need to convince. He might be the CTO, the CIO, you name it, just maybe a lowly manager. But you've got to convince him to say yes to the grand plan of moving stuff away from Windows 10. So he asked me, what's this Linux thing, and can I save money? So I just said, you're it. So you need to present to him. And we'll go through the things. All these are AI generated, by the way, so don't any resemblance to people in this room. It's just completely coincidental. So he has some challenges ahead. He's got limited budget. End of life is approaching for Windows 10. People are talking about the end of 10 initiative. Hopefully you might be able to convince him to do a trial. And he smiles nervously, as you can see, going, okay. But he then starts thinking, because you've been priming him with all this information of how great it is, that maybe tariffs are going to hit the cost of just about anything, including there might be software tariffs being introduced by Trump. There's this move towards national tech self-reliance. And also a big thing here is that the big name apps are moving to web-based products. So Microsoft 365. And a lot of people just don't even know now that they're using Microsoft 365 on a web platform as opposed to a local binary on their own machine. So he thinks, this could work. But then on the other hand, it'll never work, because he's got all these reasons not to move forward. Lack of vendor support. There's more on that later. There'll be resistance from the hardware vendors. Again, I'll cover that a little bit later. Resistance from IT management, and we've all heard the reasons why people don't want to go to Linux. Who's going to handle the first and second line support? But you've got all these things you've got in your plan, in your business plan to present to him. And if you don't, you have to. Because if you don't, these are the points where lots of efforts to migrate have failed, because you don't take into account these kind of issues. So, there is demand. These are some of the clippings I found about 3 months ago when I first started putting these presentations together. The press is absolutely full of this now. It could be my algorithm, I don't know. I guess we've all seen the same thing. It's a growing phenomenon. There's more people. But Horace has probably Googled this topic and come back with the same answer. But you've got to highlight the bits that he's probably already discovered and say, these are the things. Privacy, security, all these things are really important to your company. If they're not, and if you don't think they're important, you need to ask your CEO why, and explain it to him why it's not that important. It really is a whole new world. Users will learn to love the speed and reliability and the lack of reboots especially. And who here has migrated a friend or a colleague from Windows to Linux? Anyone? Okay, fantastic, awesome. How many of you, apart from the initial usage or getting people used to it, do they call you every second day and say, what you've installed on my machine is crap? Anyone? Has anyone had that experience? Whereas if you're the same person who does the technical support for other friends who are using Windows, of course, you get all those kind of comments about Windows, in my experience anyway. So people do have a better time running Linux than they do running Windows. And of course, there's another scenario. Extra points for who knows what this meme is. Anyone? No? It's Taco or Trump always chickens out when it comes to tariffs. So it's an unpredictable world. He's making it that way. There are other leaders, so-called leaders around the world that are making things even worse. These are, again, the things you need to worry about and start planning for. Digital sovereignty is a big one, more important than ever. So it's all about the use case. How do you actually, how do you migrate 20,000 systems or even 100 systems? And it all does boil down to what the use case provides and is requires. Some people might want Linux desktop with GNOME or KDE. The distributions, do you want to go for a European-based distribution or a US-based one? And there are political risks in doing any of these things. And how do you make all the applications work? So the goal is essentially rolling out with 100% functionality on day one. But of course, that's for a user group that's very simple. You want minimal user training. It will, though, depend on 100% functionality if you've picked the right group of users that you can migrate to. And what the goal isn't. It's not a desktop war, unfortunately, because I'm in KDE. It's not a distribution war. It's not anything like that. It's all about, and it's certainly not about rolling your own distribution for the customer, because that way it's going to end, eventually it's going to end up a complete nightmare, and you're not going to have vendor support. You have the people who rolled that distribution leave the company, and then it'll get abandoned and it will fail. And lots of migrations have failed exactly that way. And by doing that, you lose the advantages of the size of the community that we're all a part of. So the larger the environment, the greater the team separation. And therefore, it becomes simultaneously more difficult to manage because there are bigger teams than in separate environments. And for example, with Allied Irish Bank, we had HCL, an Indian outsourcer, who were managing the desktops. Irish Telecom were managing the networking. Servers were being managed by Wipro. And AD and authentication services were being managed internally, which meant what we would be doing or what you will be doing in a migration is touching every single one of those teams. Getting them all into the same room is a task because they've all got their own different priorities and they try not to interact with each other as much as possible. So that's something to remember. But there are different models that we'll be looking at now. So less than 100 systems, quite simple. More than 100, then there's opportunities for a lot more opportunities for automation and things like that. But let's look at the economics. 1,000 systems. These are kind of extremely generous numbers, not massaged very much. You're looking at a minimum cost for 1,000 Windows systems to be replaced to Windows 11 of about 700K. And they're extremely rough numbers. It doesn't, it's involving a contract, set of contractors to do the work because always the IT people are too busy. And it adds up quite quickly. And of course, Horace absolutely hates it because he doesn't want to spend that much money. He's got other priorities. He wants to spend money on other things. So you say, oh, how about using a free OS? No. A free OS is not the answer. Because those 7,000, that 700K number buys security and in a manner of speaking. And again, we've got many technical solutions, but they need to be applied to the correct problem. So get the hell out of his office. It's all about risk. And okay. So it's like driving a car. You should be insured. You pay for that insurance. In case of the accident, the insurance company pays. Otherwise, you are bankrupted. And this is the kind of system, this is kind of the background you need to think about in business. Business manages risk by paying people to take it away, which is why Microsoft are so popular. And it's also why SUSE and Ubuntu and Red Hat are also popular, because they've got all the existing mechanisms for insurance and certification in place. So let's think of something where we can replace it with replace the Windows desktops with Linux, and use an automated system, work out some sort of support fee, and we'll look at, let's say 40. I think it's 40 euros per machine. And it ends up being 10% of the cost of doing a physical move to different machines. That is an interesting number, and it wasn't massaged. It just came out that way based on very, very generic numbers. Yes?
Sorry, 40 euros per machine, how long?
12 months is what I'd imagine.
4 months?
12 months.
12 months. Okay.
And for the duration of the license, yeah. This is just rough numbers, something I've put together, and something that I've also used some of the work I've done with SUSE and with Red Hat as to something that might be a reasonable number. But that was several years ago. They've probably got different ideas now. So an example opportunity, I mean, 1%. So there's 54 million public service employees in the EU. If you get 1% of that, you could save €500 million. But if you then were to migrate, assuming that there's no Linux on any desktop in the EU, if you were to match the global penetration of Linux desktop inside the EU, you're saving 2.7 billion, which is pretty awesome amount of number, a big number. And that's just basically matching inside the EU with what the penetration of the desktop is in the outside world. So even 1% of a lot is still a lot. So then you need to start talking about support. How are you going to do that? There's different ways. Internal team tasks might not necessarily change much, because I'll be looking at printers and replacing faulty equipment, changing printers and all that kind of stuff. A Linux vendor would support only the critical kernel issues and just maybe the desktop and Wayland bootable, no apps. The Linux vendors, so as far as I know, and I've spoken to, they are not interested in supporting the desktop. So you have to come to some sort of deal where they go support the Wayland or X and no apps, and everything else you do is above that in the stack. So a reseller would have to be involved, a community would have to be involved. So then there's this Linux support license that I was discussing before. You'd split it between the various parties. Would pay for, at some point, would pay for some liability insurance on certified desktops. Otherwise, end users would be, or companies would be on their own. Something like the Geeko Foundation, which I started a couple of years ago, which is all about attracting money to the OpenSUSE group movement. We could take on some of that insurance risk if that was a possibility. So, you know, give me less money, said no manager ever. So what department head ever wanted any less budget? And the thing is that you will actually require less money to do the same thing with Linux. In our experience, and it was a very limited experience with Allied Irish Bank, it was 7,500 desktops spread across a bank footprint of, I think, 160 branches. We never went to one single branch ever. We're managing those 7,500 systems with roughly 2.5 people. If you're looking at Windows teams, support teams, they typically, if they're doing things really badly, it's about 30 desktops per Windows engineer. If they're doing something really well, if they're super good, it'll be 100 to 150 desktops per Windows engineer. So there's going to be a massive change in the culture of the support organization. But then you don't obviously say that to Horace, because he's going to go, well, yeah. You say, well, we could reuse that money and your personnel and do more productive things. But bottom line, be prepared and have the best possible story to tell when you're talking to Horace about these facts. You have to do a brief consulting engagement. Formulate a focused plan of what you need to extract from that engagement. Just don't walk in and go, oh, well, what do you want? You need to do things like get a big one is discover all the desktop hardware, because that's going to pay. That will give you a good indication of whether or not you want to even be involved in that migration or not. And then determine a good user group to do the initial tests on. So that group would be people are using the low-hanging fruit, browser-based Java, Node, RDP, etc. As I said before, customers, okay, 10, okay. Customers are increasingly unaware that those apps are even cloud-based. So we've got the OS, we've got, there's more to be done, but assuming we've done all those things, so the other thing is, if you've got a machine like that, if your customer's got those kind of machines, gaming machines, just walk away, because you'll spend more time trying to work out how to manage them than actually managing them, in my experience again. Make sure they're systems with enterprise firmware, enterprise class machines. These machines are built to a standard, not to a price point. So they're designed to be maintainable and remotely manageable. And they're not designed to be maintainable, not tweakable. Start building your ISO and embedding certain automation components in it to enable swift and hands-free deployment. Things like AutoYast and Kickstart. You build those scripts and run them during the install time. You can use something called Kiwi, which is part of the OpenSUSE umbrella, so to speak. It runs the open build service in the background, and you can get most of the way by using this to get an ISO that will just do what you need it to do. Also, don't put the flesh in the etc. scale. All these things that I don't have time to talk about now, but these are the things that you'll need to put in place. If you've never heard of etc. scale, it's something that when there's a new user created on your system, it just inherits everything in that folder. So you're pre-populating things onto that new user. Now, Active Directory is your friend. There's a temptation to replace it, but you don't, because you will need it. It's the central directory of everything that you need. Do you want to do backup? Well, that's up to you and your customer. So if you get to 1 to 25 desktops, it's a small company, you could do it the old way, USB stick, put an ISO on it. You know the rest. We've done that, and that's kind of appropriate for 10 to up to 25 users. Instead of using a USB stick, put it on a USB hard disk. So you can then run a script that will back up everything in the /users folder to that, and then copy it back when your installation is complete. This is a grey box, everyone, but it's also a KVM over IP box that has enough memory or flash RAM on it to contain an ISO, installation ISO. And I was running this from India last weekend, and you could do an installation just by mounting the ISO and do that, and do the installation remotely. Why would you want to use that? You could just post one of these or 10 of them to your customer and just say, put one of these in the back of your machine, we'll do the installation, and then when you're done, pass it on to the next person, and you don't need to visit that site at all, which is just something that we've just started using. Past 100 desktops gets more challenging. I'm probably got, 5 minutes left? Okay. So automation is a big one. You can't do that scale of installation without a significant amount of automation. And it's more work initially to build the images and build the scripts to make it all happen. But once you start doing it, it makes all the difference. And you want to be able to install and join the Windows, install the machine, join it to the Windows domain as a native member, and it will preserve the workstation name and its security identifier, which makes life a lot easier, trust me. So this is what we've done. We connect Active Directory to a management migration database. We manually boot workstations using the F12 or whatever the remote boots key is. It loads a memory resident audit program, reports the hardware back to our database, and then reboots back into Windows. We can do that overnight or at the end of the day. But that then ties Active Directory to the records in our management database as to what's what and where it is. Then we get sort of into some interesting ways to do this. I'm not sure if it's clear enough, but each one of those folders on the right-hand side could contain a different image of Linux. So, for example, you might have a call center at the top left, and that's a particular image that you've fine-tuned to make it possible to just do 1 or 2 web apps, and that's it, nothing else. It's kind of like what we're doing with Allied Irish Bank. They ran 1 app plus printing, and that was all they did. So you drag one of those machines into the call center thing, and it becomes a call center PC the next time it boots. It does the installation, and then it reboots and rejoins the domain as itself and becomes the operating system that you've defined for the call center. Pull it out, put it somewhere else, and it becomes that image. Which kind of does make anything possible, because you've suddenly got complete control of the hardware. You have the flexibility to move between operating system images and even functions. So you could just boot to a browser without a login script and have your have whatever the app is at the front end of the browser. That could be your login, and that could be, like, for example, my webmail. You could just log on to your webmail as a web client. You could boot to a Java app. You could boot directly to a RDP app. So you could actually make the Windows machine that you just migrated to Linux could actually look like a Windows machine after it's migrated, because it'll boot to an RDP front end. Loads of other different opportunities. It is limited by your imagination, really. For example, there's something I was thinking about the other day. You could have two sessions running simultaneously. One of them could be local, like the Linux desktop on the bottom, and it could be an RDP thing on Control-Alt-F1 for the Windows 10 environment. Again, it's whatever you want it to do, because you've got control of the hardware all of a sudden, and you can do whatever you like with it. With Allied Irish Bank, whenever we had a machine failure, we would just pull one machine out of stock to get sent up, and they would press F12 to boot it, and it would become the banking image, and it would just be a brand new machine. And that's it. I mean, anytime there was a system issue or some sort of corruption, again, it's F12, it refreshes itself, reloads itself, and it becomes, again, itself in the grand scheme of things. And if you get past the first few groups trials, you'll start to gain ground. And I believe that the organisation will then start getting behind the initiative if you get some key people involved. And they might then start modifying their own purchasing behaviour to start buying Linux or web-based, web-compatible apps. So once you get the first, so I'd be saying, get the simple groups done first, start moving to more complex environments where there's probably a mixture of applications, but you need to find the replacements. And each group, you might need to build a separate image for the job. Make sure you're doing automatic installations and just minimising any opportunities for user complaints. You know, in the first instance, your first set of trials, spend as much time with the users as possible, and try and gain an understanding of what their feelings are for the new environment. And of course, now we've done all that, and Horace is happy. And we've got all those fantastic things that come automatically from Linux. It's low cost. It doesn't need to replace all the machines. There's no junking of thousands of systems in the back room because apparently they won't work with Windows. And it will, and therefore environmentally it's a better way to do it. So happiness, of course, is a happy Horace. With Linux on the desktop, Linux on his desktop, and he feels free at last. And thank you very much.
We just have a few minutes for a quick question or two, and I have Tobias running around with a microphone if anybody wants to ask anything. Apparently you were crystal clear and everybody understood all of it. Or it was just too much to take in. So yeah, thank you very much. And and to the The rest of you, in 6 to 7 minutes, we will be back here with Minding the Big Picture, Opportunity from Chaos by Nate Graham, or in the other room, Neil Gompa will talk about Fedora KDE Plasma Desktop Edition. Now what?